All right, YouTube, we have some interesting information that came out about the Central African Republic not too long ago. And this information is from like a couple months ago, but it's something that I came across fairly recently. I wanted to cover on this channel because it's just interesting to me with regards to the Central African Republic. Now, I've covered the Central African Republic and other former, French and English colonial nations on this channel dozens of times before. I know I've mentioned certain things, but apparently the Central African Republic, for everybody that for those of you who don't know, is one of the poorest, most underdeveloped nations in the world. It's literally run by armed militias. There's literally parts of the country outside of the capital, probably, I would say probably just about everywhere outside of the capital of Bangui, that literally is lawless, and there's literally no rule of law, and it's just literally taken over by armed militias. So apparently the Central African Republic abolished the death penalty recently after not carrying out executions since 1981, and they had the death penalty in place for general crimes like murder and everything else, and murder and repeat violent offenders and armed robbery and things like that. Just common crimes, which I actually agree with, the death penalty in the most severe cases. You've all have seen my Pogo Island laws and my Pogo Island stories, where I've written stories about where, this person was executed for this and that and whatever, but for the most serious crimes. So yes, I do think that there are certain people that are just beyond reproach and are literally beyond any hopes of rehabilitation, and they're just not worth keeping around in society. They're just not worth public safety. They're not worth taxpayer dollars to keep them in prison for the rest of their life. I don't know. I just don't think it's worth it, but it just varies on a case-by-case basis. But overall, I support it. But now, here's the funny thing about this whole thing about the Central African Republic abolishing the death penalty. The one thing about this is like, okay, so now maybe the Central African Republic will stop executing people for stupid shit like fucking witchcraft, and will stop executing people for certain things like religious crimes and thought crimes and things like that, because that's basically what goes on over in those countries and in those former colonial nations, like those former French colonial nations, because many countries in the Horn of Africa and the Heart of Africa are basically, a lot of them are French colonial nations, and they're usually the vast majority of them are underdeveloped and are just brutal authoritarian dictatorships, many of which are US-backed dictatorships, and some of which are now Russian-backed dictatorships at this point. The Central African Republic is now kind of more or less a Russian-backed dictatorship. So I don't know. I have mixed feelings about this. Part of me thinks, oh no, the Central African Republic abolishing the death penalty, oh yeah, having one of the worst crime rates in the world, having one of the worst violence outbreaks in the world, literally has armed militias governing more than probably 80% of the country, is going to abolish the death penalty and let people roam free. Well, it kind of doesn't really matter, because they've been doing that since the beginning of time, because with no execution since 1981, and having probably being considered one of the most dangerous places on Earth and one of the most underdeveloped nations on Earth, it kind of doesn't really matter in a way, because it's not like the people who run it are really thinking with what's in between their ears. Because remember, the Central African Republic also wanted to start using the cryptocurrency, because that's really gonna go down well. That's gonna go down well for your economy. It's going to go down well for these fucking oligarchs that run the Central African Republic and are governing these third world authoritarian nations and everything else. It's kind of, I don't know. I think maybe if they expanded on it and actually had more of rule of law, I think they probably would be a hell of a lot better off, and had more of a better economy and things like that. Well, obviously, with a better economy, there's less poverty and less people resorting to extreme options in order to survive. That's basically what it is, and this is what happened since they've gained independence from France since 1960. This is what the Central African Republic has been like since the beginning of time. The only people that you can really feel bad for are the people that are there and are caught in the midst of all of this. So it's like, okay, the Central African Republic has had laws on the books, literally calling for the death penalty for people convicted of witchcraft. So basically, burning witches at the stake and so on and so forth. You know, many of those countries in the heart of Africa and many of those sub-Saharan nations, sub-Saharan African nations do that type of thing. I mean, many Muslim countries do that type of thing. I mean, not just African nations. I mean, Middle Eastern countries do the same thing. I'm sure Bangladesh probably does the same thing. Who the fuck knows? I'm not saying that for sure. I'm just saying, I mean, that sounds like something that some place like that would probably do. I didn't know that's what Papua New Guinea does. I mean, Papua New Guinea is also one of the most underdeveloped nations on Earth as well. Same thing between Australia and Indonesia and West Papua to the west. You know, so that's what colonialism is, and this is what it does, and this is what it does to people. It's like you tie these people under colonialism for hundreds of years, for generation upon generation, and then give them independence, and then look what happens. You know, this is what happens when you colonize people, and then this is what happens. You know, I mean, look at Hawaii, for example. I mean, now the U.S. colonized them, and now look at Hawaii. Hawaii now has like a housing crisis and everything else, and it's fucked up. The whole thing is fucked up, and shit that's going on over in those countries are pretty fucked up. A lot of those things that are going on over there are pretty fucked up, and then none of it's looking good. None of it's looking good. So them abolishing the death penalty, I don't know. I mean, okay, but part of me thinks, I don't think you should, considering how horrible the crime rates are and how little rule of law that's there. That's number one, because number one, you had laws on the books that call for the death penalty for people who are convicted of, like, the most serious crimes. I've taken time to actually look at the Central African Republic's like criminal law code. I mean, leave it to me to do something like that. I mean, that's such a Zachary thing to do. I've taken that and I've translated it from French into English, and I've translated many of the passages from the Central African Republic's law code, and you can do that, just copy and paste and translate it into French and into English on Google Translate. Simple. I mean, it's simple. I mean, I've done that on my own independent research, on my own time, and on my own days. So I've done that, and there's literally laws that call for executing people for armed robbery and executing people for their second offense of a crime punishable by forced labor for life. Translation, if you're sentenced to for an abominable, heinous crime punishable with imprisonment in time, shall be sentenced to forced labor for life. If the second offense is punished by forced labor for life, he shall be sentenced to death. That's translated from French, from the French language of the Central African Republic's law code over into English. And imprisonment in time is literally just translated from, like, imprisonment for a determinate number of years. Imprisonment can be either for life, which is indeterminate, can be natural life, and imprisonment in time is just a way of saying imprisonment for a definite number of years. That would be the way you would say it in English, basically. So, with all of that being said, you had these laws in the books for so many years, you could have enforced these laws, you didn't do it, and this is what happens. When you don't enforce the rule of law, this is kind of what happens. So now with you abolishing the death penalty, I mean, what would it matter? You haven't used it for almost over 40 fucking years. I mean, it doesn't really matter. You don't use it, and then this is what happens. And now you're going to abolish it in times like these. I mean, I don't think it's... I mean, part of me thinks, I don't know if you should be abolishing it, but I mean, who the fuck am I to say anything about it? I mean, who am I to say something about it? I'm just an independent YouTuber that covers news and worldly affairs and occasionally does streams every now and again. The latter more so nowadays. Stuff like that. So it's part of me thinks that, but then the other part of me is like, I could give two shits less about it. It doesn't really matter, because it's not going to matter anyway. I mean, whether they enforce it or not. I mean, basically the Central African Republic, in order to fix that country and fix that part of the world and fix many of those countries over in the Middle East and so on and so forth, and these countries and these, like, former Soviet states that are also authoritarian, like Turkmenistan and Tajikistan and stuff like that, you would need to start them over from scratch, basically. I mean, that's how you're going to do it. you're just going to have to do that in order to fix those places. But it's for them to do, and it's basically for them to do. That's really all it comes down to. So I don't know. Central African Republic abolishing the death penalty. I don't know. They got record high crime rates and one of the worst in the world, and are one of the most poorest, underdeveloped nations in the world because their government is corrupt and inept and they don't give a fuck. Kind of like the American government that I rant and rave about on a daily basis as an American myself. You know what I mean? Look at the fucking shit that goes on in America and all the nonsense that goes on here. But there's many parts of the world that have it worse, and it's really fucked up. And I think we need to cover it and make awareness of what's going on in the world, because this shit is happening in real life. This isn't like a Zachary Pogo Island story. This is something that's going on in the real world, and that's why we need to spread awareness about these issues, because these things are happening in the real world. So, with that being said, I don't know, when they're abolishing the death penalty, I don't know, that's kind of, I don't know how to feel about that. But then part of me is like, I don't really care. Part of me is like, I don't really give a fuck, because it's like, you do it, you're going to do it, it's not really going to matter. I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, you're not really going after people anyway. I mean, it's not like the police are going after anybody anyway. I mean, there's stories about where the police are really just going after their political opponents, and really not even going after the criminals, because they don't even have the resources to go after criminals. This is what corruption does. Corruption impedes everything. It impedes the rule of law. It impedes the police. It impedes everything. Because police in countries like Liberia and Sierra Leone, I mean, the latter two are British colonial nations. Liberia being colonized by the U.S. Yeah, I know, stay classy. Basically rely on bribes. The police in those countries and in many other third world nations like that rely on bribes in order to thrive. And they don't thrive like that because you don't thrive on corruption. Corruption results in police not being able to do their fucking jobs. And when they don't, crimes go unsolved, and that's the kind of thing that happens. So there's really no rule of law in the Central African Republic anyway. So with them abolishing the death penalty is kind of a moot point. I don't think it's really the right move, considering, but, hey, everybody's, like, doing patty cakes about how great it is. And all these human rights organizations are like, oh, my God, it's such a great thing. It's like, oh, okay, number one on the list that they're doing. They're abolishing the death penalty. Okay. Well, meanwhile, they do that. Meanwhile, there's extrajudicial killings of their political opponents, and the police are still, they're probably still going to be killing people under the ground. It's still not going to really fucking matter. Okay, so it's like, yeah, we can sit here and do patty cakes and do high fives about how great it is that they're abolishing the death penalty in the Central African Republic. Oh my God, it's such a great thing. It's like, get the fuck out of here. It's like they're so anti-death penalty that even like the worst nations on earth could abolish it, and they would still be like, yeah, patty cakes about that, yeah. It's so fucking dumb, like, really. And most of these are Western organizations anyway, so it's not really going to matter. It's really just these same Western organizations that really were the colonizers of these countries in the first place. Yeah, that kind of thing. So the whole thing is really fucked up. So yeah, I wanted to cover that this morning because it's just too good to not cover. I don't know. It's just the irony of the whole thing and the craziness of the whole thing is just really fucking insane. So wanted to cover that, but that's about all I have to say for today. I'll try to stream before the weekend before I go back to work. If not, I'll be back with more videos, content, and other stuff in the works. Stay tuned for more and more stuff on the way. This is Zach, the Celtics guy, saying thank you for watching. Stay tuned. Be well. Be safe. Be careful. And there's definitely going to be many heat waves in many parts of the U.S., including here in Mass. Definitely stay cool and stay hydrated, definitely. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Stuff in the works. Stay tuned to find out more and more stuff on the way. Be safe, be well, and I'll see you all again next time. And let's just hope that, I'm just hoping for the best for people worldwide, because, I advocate for people. I advocate for people. I really do, and I want to spread awareness of these types of issues, and I think it's important, and I think we should all be aware of these types of things going on in the world. And it's like, very few commercial flights fly over to Bangui, which is like, okay. Yeah, very few fly to the Central African Republic. Yeah, because no offense, but who really wants to go there anyway? Considering all of the shit that goes on in that country and all the information that's coming out of there, very few are going to be invested there. Many flights are gonna go there because, in all honesty, who the hell would want to go there? Because I'll tell you right now, I sure don't. Peace out.